Hello and welcome. We're letting folks enter into the room, but we want to thank you so much for joining us for our third webinar series in assessing opportunities and barriers for minority producers transitioning to climate smart and regenerative agricultural programs. We'll wait 1 or 2 minutes for folks to be able to enter the room, and then we will start our program. So thank you so much for your patience. Right, we'll give it 1 more minute and then we will welcome folks in and start our presentation. Just for your awareness, this is being recorded and it will also, after the webinar is completed, be posted on our landing page so that if anyone missed the opportunity or would like to see the presentation again or would like to share it, that recording will be available for everyone who registered, and it will be on our landing page for anyone to take a look after the event. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us. Just an overview of our program today. This is an event that is co-hosted between the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, or FAR, Resources for the Future, RFF, and the Freedmen Heirs Foundation, FHF. We will provide a short overview of our organizations as well as talk about why we're hosting this webinar series and what we hope to gain. And then we have a dynamic discussion with several panelists to discuss mapping information networks and understanding producer barriers to accessing resources and funding. And then we will have the opportunity for Q&A with attendees. So just for your awareness, you might note that during the first part of the dialogue, all participants are muted, but feel free to answer any questions or ask any questions in the chat function and the Q&A, and we will be monitoring the chat and Q&A for the end of the presentation. There will definitely be time allotted at the end. And as I noted, we will record and share this webinar with any registrant via email, and then the recording will also be available on our website for your reference. So now we get into the fun part of talking about why we're here today. So I'll start. I am Dr. Lakeisha Odom with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, or FAR. FAR is an organization that builds unique public-private partnerships. We connect funders, researchers, and farmers, and our mission is to provide every person access to affordable, nutritious food grown on thriving farms. For those who are less familiar about FAR, we are a 501c3 created in the 2014 Farm Bill to increase public agriculture investments. We aim to fill knowledge gaps, and we are complementary to USDA's research agenda. To date, we have funded over 390 awarded grants. We have funded and matched approximately over $700 million with 550 distinct partners. And we work across 4 priority areas: cultivating thriving production systems, bolstering healthy food systems, sustaining vibrant agroecosystems, and strengthening scientific workforce. We recognize the value in what we do. For every $20 in public research investment, there's for every $1 spent in public research investment, that's a value of $20 to the U.S. agriculture. So we recognize the value of identifying research gaps, working with academics, our private sector and public sector partners in order to identify and develop innovative solutions to current agricultural problems. So that is why we are so interested in understanding a bit more about the barriers and challenges to our minority farmers in transitioning. I'll turn things over to my colleague, Suzanne Russo, to speak about RFF.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm so excited about the discussion that we're going to hear. And I am proud to represent Resources for the Future in this work. Resources for the Future is also a 501c3 nonprofit research organization. We seek to provide insights for policymakers at the national, state, and local levels around how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As the Director of Environmental Justice, I work to extend that research to understand the distribution of costs and benefits across different geographic and socio-demographic sectors, to understand unique impacts that might come out of different policies on underserved communities, and the most important and fun, to partner with community organizations to translate community-driven solutions into policy frameworks that can be adopted and funded. So it's absolutely a pleasure for us to get to partner with FFAR and with Freedmen Heirs Foundation on this work. And Seneca, I'll pass it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. I am Seneca Edwards Heron, and I am the founder and executive director of Freedmen Heirs Foundation. Freedmen Heirs Foundation is also a nonprofit organization with a laser focus on expediting change in U.S. agriculture by bridging the gap between two worlds, Black farmers and the marketplace. We are dedicated to a vision of eliminating inequities in agriculture, and we work through that process through our mission, which is to provide Black farmers with access to technical assistance, capital, and more specifically, new market opportunities. We are very interested in his work as it relates to minority producers, as Black farmers are categorized in that underserved and underutilized farmer producer group. And given the historical context and the location of a lot of the Black farmers in the United States, this topic is very timely and of utmost importance. At Freedmen Heirs, we operate around pillars of trust, and that stands for transparency, respect, understanding, support, and transformation as we work with industry stakeholders, the government, other nonprofit, as well as the Black farmers that we service throughout the United States. So, as a result of this partnership with FFAR and Resources for the Future, the question is, what do we hope to accomplish by this series of webinars that we are convening? We know that minority producers are a critical component of our nation's food security, land management, and environmental stewardship pathways. Minority producers are almost exclusively food producers growing crops and producing livestock to feed regional communities rather than growing commodity crops, which is the bulk of the producers that we work with and service. We also think it's very important to highlight the fact that minority producers tend to be smaller producers with more limited resources than their white counterparts, yielding ingenuity and deep understandings of their lands that we can tap into and have a better understanding. And yet producers of color remain severely underinvested in the United States across the spectrum of public and private agricultural programs. And we want to change that by bringing to light what some of those barriers are that are hindering the expansion, but also bringing to the forefront some of the solutions that can help us overcome those barriers. And we're going to have a very engaging conversation today with our guests on how we can move that along. There is also a growing interest from non-federal partners in the area of research and information to support minority producers, which I think is very important because on the end of the researchers, what research can be done to bring to the forefront to provide those in policy areas in the government, but also to help us to understand research components that we may have already overlooked or not paying as much attention to as we should. So this panel discussion creates an opportunity for us to highlight those areas of expertise from our guests and also to bring a level of understanding to those that we are servicing, as well as each of you on the call today. So in this particular session, we will explore how information networks for minority farmers are currently structured. What are some of the key challenges that minority farmers face in accessing resources, technical assistance, and most importantly, funding? Also, what opportunities are available to improve the efficiency within these networks? And what are the role of the organizations in closing the gaps in equity, access, and resource distribution? I will now turn it back over to my colleague, Suzanne Russo, to introduce our moderator for this session today.
Thanks, Seneca. We're incredibly excited about the panelists that are joining us today. And our moderator, Alex Rosales, was a member of the USDA Equity Commission and is a professor of agroecology and sustainable food systems at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which is a state public university and a minority serving institution. Dr. Rosales is bringing a wealth of information about the barriers and opportunities that exist for minority producers in the climate transition, as well as some really unique perspectives developed out of his work independently and also with the Equity Commission. Dr. Rosales, I'm going to turn it over to you. And throughout the discussion today, I will be monitoring the chat. And then at the end of the panelist discussions, everybody will see my face again as I help to bring those audience questions to these panelists. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Suzanne. And it's a pleasure to be here with this distinguished panel. I'm excited to hear from everyone and hear their presentations. I'm also excited to open this conversation because I've had a lot of my own experiences, both as an academic, as a researcher in this field, as well as a member of the Federal Equity Commission Subcommittee in Agriculture. And I'm coming to my third and final year of service on that committee. We can talk about what those next steps might be kind of towards the end of my presentation. Before I begin, I would like to take the time to mention that I am a first generation and first in my family graduate, college graduate. And that's germane because every university that I've attended is a federally designated minority serving institution. And I've benefited from the mentors and the programs that have been that have helped students like myself overcome some of the barriers that exist as you pursue higher education. And so in my position here at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, one of the premier Hispanic serving institutions in the United States, I take that personal worldview with me in the work that I do. And I'm sure that the panelists have very similar stories about how their personal worldview intersects very much with their professional ambition. So I started here at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which is also considered a USDA designated Hispanic serving agricultural college and university, which is a designation that was given to the university through the 2009 Farm Bill. So we are a USDA recognized institution that provides educational opportunity for Hispanic students. Now, Texas is a very unique place to work because we have the highest concentration of Hispanic farmers in the country. About 13% of all Hispanic farmers are in this small 4-county region where the university is located. The university plays a very important role as a regionally anchored institution in serving that community, both of students and the communities in which the students live. And in this case, a very agrarian community. And so building a program around that and realizing the cultural capital that our students had in terms of bilingualism and biculturalism, and understanding that they can also play an important role of envisioning and moving towards a food system that's more inclusive and diverse, and that serves that constituency that reflect the communities in which we live. So understanding that as an academic and as a scientist has been a very important foundation of what I do, because I understand that there are certain barriers that we've needed to overcome as an academic institution, as a research institution, and you can see that in the work that I do. For example, a lot of the work that we do that's research intensive. We work directly with farmers, trying to understand informational barriers, trying to uncover information that's not available to our farmers. For example, we've done a lot of work the last few years around conservation strategies and cover cropping in our area, which is an area where that's not located in a lot of the informational powerhouses of regions of our country. So there's not a lot of information relevant to areas that are in the US South, areas that are subtropical, areas that have arid conditions and water limited farms. And so a lot of the information, for example, available to cover crops, around cover crops is developed around the Pacific Northwest, around the Midwest, and around the humid eastern part of the United States. And so a lot of our farmers, when they're looking for specific information, not only is it not regionally relevant, but often it's not culturally accessible. So for example, a lot of the information that is being published on these topics are often locked up in paywalled journals and often in language that's not interpretable by the common user. So even though they can read English, it's often unintelligible for most of us. My parents can't understand the work that I try to publish in these journals, right? And so understanding that requires that academics like myself, we have to re-envision the role of academia in getting that kind of information out to the public who need it. And that's really a part of how I've built our program. Now, I've mentioned to you that schools like my UTRGV and other schools across the country serve in very similar roles. Unfortunately, we do not have access to the same type of federal investment that some of our land grant university counterparts get. So if you've read the Federal Equity Report, you know that there are a number of different colleges and universities across the country that receive federal appropriations every year to help support their research, their teaching, and their outreach to the community. Every state has one. In fact, most states have, a lot of states have two. One that is called an 1862 land grant institution, and another one called an 1890 institution. Those often exist in 19 of the southern states. These are what we call historically Black colleges and universities, the 1890 colleges, as designated by the USDA, and then the 1860 colleges. There have been a series of other recognitions that recognize other tribal colleges and other institutions that serve a diverse constituency. And unfortunately, a lot of those universities, including the 1890 colleges and the 1994 colleges, and including the colleges that are considered Hispanic serving agricultural colleges, they are underinvested, right? What does this mean? Why does this even matter to let's say, a minority farmer? Well, what we've been seeing in the workforce, even in the last 40 years, is a widening gap of professionals entering into food and agriculture, where we see a widening racial disparity, meaning to say that a lot of students of color are not the students of color are not entering food and agriculture and natural resources related careers at the same rate that other students are. So the superpowers my students have of biculturalism and bilingualism are not increasing and not entering into the workforce, and they're not able to reach the kind of diverse constituencies that exist all across the country. And some of the work that I've done on the Federal Equity Commission is really reaching out, is requesting the recognition of some of these institutions that provide that can provide culturally appropriate and culturally regionally relevant information to our farmers. Now, that's just one of the main issues that we talked about on the Federal Equity Commission. Obviously, I welcome anyone to read the report. It's published online under the USDA.gov website. And you can see some of the recommendations we made. A lot of them are in recognition of the historical inequities that exist throughout the history of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Some of them have to do with customer service. Some of them have to do with the use of technology. A lot of them have to do with changes in the delivery of programs through the USDA and through its different forms of governance. And we've had a robust discussion on conservation districts and the FSA, for example. And so we put together a list of 66 recommendations that you can review that span from kind of general improvements for customer service for the department all the way to rural housing, improvements to policies and programs around rural housing. Several of those are changes to programs that have been implemented nearly immediately by the USDA, and some of them are recommendations that require legislation. Now, that means that there has to be some cooperation within our elected officials to push things forward. And unfortunately, as we know, we are kind of we are in an election year. If you don't know that, and we are kind of waiting to see what the outcome of the election year is. And so this, as I mentioned to you earlier, this is my final year of service on there. I'm not exactly sure how I would and what my role might be next year, but we're kind of in a wait and see. Now, let me just add this final piece before I turn it over to some of our distinguished panelists. As somebody who's regionally anchored in my institution, I think, and some of the folks who are even on this call, we all know what it means to be anchored to the communities in which we work. Often, we can't wait for change. We can't wait for federal policies to change. We can't wait for federal programs to roll over to us. We can try to become more aware, try to access more information, right? So for example, we have farmers here who are waiting on federal programs to roll down to the local level. And often what it does, it rolls over from the capital, it rolls over to the state capitals. And when you're working in like kind of agrarian rural regions like where I work, by the time those programs roll out here, the money's all dried up, right? And so how do we implement local change? That's a big question. Obviously, information is required, and because action without the appropriate information is often fatal. So what we need to do, obviously, I think is to envision what local and regional change is, and that's what we've done here in South Texas. We've leveraged some of the students that come out of my program, and they are now strategically placed in positions of change. Some of them run food nutrition programs, some of them run a community-based organization, some of them work for the USDA. And now we are able to collaborate amongst ourselves with this kind of same shared vision and goal. And I think this is something that is often understated. What is our goal, right? And I think the goal of talking about empowering minority producers, talking about strengthen local farms, talking about how to improve farm production in ways that don't cause harm to farm workers, or how to improve the conditions of rural communities and in ways that help them both economically, but also conserve their environment. Those are kinds of local system questions that I think is kind of one of our first priorities, at least for us here in our region. So I'm excited to hear from the other panelists on the work that they're doing, both locally and nationally. And so I'd like to invite them to present some of their work in their various capacities to the audience here, and so that I can also learn from them.
Thank you so much, Alex. What wonderful framing you've provided for the discussion today. And I think we all are hoping to hear more from you later on about the work that you're doing in South Texas to create change locally, a little bit more about the strategies and what's working and what hasn't, or what else is needed. And next up, we have Michelle Stern and Dr. Lutrina Staley. And Michelle, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm pulling up my slides here, and Dr. Staley is going to start us off, but just want to see some nods that you all can see what I'm sharing here. Thank you, Dr. Odom. So Dr. Staley, do you want to take us away?
Great. Thank you so much. I apologize. I'm having some technical difficulties this morning, so I'll have to do this presentation with my camera off. But thank you all so much for having me here. My name is Dr. Lutrina Staley. I represent the National Association of Conservation Districts. I am their Equity and Outreach Program Analyst. My job is to ensure that all of our initiatives and our programs and everything that we do are equitable for all farmers. So a little bit about the National Association of Conservation Districts, or NACD. We represent over 3,000 plus conservation districts all over the United States. Those conservation districts are mostly known as soil and water conservation districts. And our mission, or their mission, is to get conservation on the ground. These districts located in communities across the nation in every community are crucial in advancing voluntary, locally led conservation. Through partnerships with producers and ranchers and foresters and conservation organizations, the conservation districts help natural resources while ensuring sustainable agricultural production. So soil and water conservation districts serve as the on-the-ground connection, or we call boots on the ground, between the farmers and conservation efforts. They provide technical assistance, education, and access to federal and state programs, and those programs that promote sustainable farming practices. By working directly with producers, soil and water conservation districts basically tailor solutions to specific landscapes, addressing issues like soil health, water quality, and erosion control. NACD recognized that in order to truly assist underserved producers, market access would be the key to their success. Many producers, particularly smaller socially disadvantaged farmers, limited resource minority, or beginning farmers and ranchers, face barriers to accessing markets that could significantly enhance their profitability. By helping producers find these new markets, soil and water conservation districts can improve the economic sustainability of farming operations, which in turn supports broader conservation goals. Also, thinking about even rural areas, helping producers access new markets can boost local economies and strengthen communities. So successful market connected producers are more likely to invest in their communities. And of course, when we think about producers, we're not only thinking about the producers, we're thinking about the communities in which they live, but we want to help enhance both the economic and environmental resilience of those areas. So farmers who are more economically stable are often more willing to invest in conservation practices. And so by helping these producers, soil and water conservation districts contribute to our equity goals, supporting fair opportunities for historically underrepresented groups. And this actually aligns with the goals of equity initiatives that not only soil and water conservation districts, but other conservation organizations are prioritizing. So in essence, soil and water conservation districts, we play a crucial role in not only conserving natural resources, also in ensuring that producers have the economic resilience needed to maintain those conservation efforts over the long term. Helping with market access enhances producers' capacity to engage in sustainable farming practices and also align with financial and ecological goals. You know, when we approach Farm for the Future, we not only approach them because they put on just fabulous workshops, but also because we wanted to bring together those from the public and private sectors, the farmers, the NGOs and nonprofits, government agencies, and those that represent ag markets to sit down in one room and discuss how we can best support producers in getting access to the markets. And so that's what Michelle is going to talk about a little bit next. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Staley, and thank you for that compliment. I was so excited when the folks at NACD reached out to me. First, I'll just say hello. I'm Michelle. I use she, her pronouns, and it's a real honor to be sharing with you here today. The thing that I'm going to share about is a series of workshops that we facilitated in partnership with NACD, as well as Dr. Odom was there supporting as well. And it was really to explore this question: how can we collaborate together with conservation districts, other conservation organizations, to build equitable pathways to market for those who are growing regeneratively, or use the hot buzz term, climate smart commodities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Forum for the Future and the Growing Our Future initiative first, and then I'm really excited actually to share with you some of the findings from our workshop. This is actually the first time that we're sharing this in a public setting. So yeah, I'm excited to get your feedback as well. So a little background about Forum for the Future. We have been working on some of the biggest global sustainability challenges for about over 25 years now. And we're really taking a systems change approach. So using a systems lens, and that includes bringing people together. We think we need to get the system in the room if we want to change the system. So that was sort of the birth of this initiative called the Growing Our Future Initiative. Through this initiative, it's a multi-stakeholder program. We brought together and continue to bring together over 135 organizations to work towards cultivating a just and regenerative agriculture system. So what does that mean? There's a lot of momentum around regenerative agriculture, and maybe that's what brought you here today. But this initiative was really birthed out of the question of, are we pushing for the right types of changes in our agriculture system that don't just address the conservation or the ecological impacts? They also bring in the social impacts, the farmer livelihoods considerations, as well as addressing historical and current inequities. So we are here to help design a system that tackles all of those issues at once. And I think you'll see from what we learned at our workshops with NACD, not only a recognition of some of the shared barriers, but also some recommendations and shared solutions that we think the system, if we work together, we can actually take those forward. So I'm going to start by just sharing who was at these workshops last summer and this February. These are just a smattering of words of how people self-identified. So NACD did a very intentional job of bringing producers and practitioners and really tapping into our networks to make sure that we could get a very diverse set of perspectives at the table. So you can see here, these are all of the folks who were in the room for the second workshop. Everything from multi-generational land stewards, female farmers, data enthusiasts, nonprofit leaders, and advocates, and really informing this work together. So one thing I wanted to start by sharing was just a breakdown of the needs that we heard from farmers in terms of accessing markets and bringing what they were growing, whether it's regenerative or sustainable or using conservation practices, bringing those to new marketplaces. So this is just anecdotal evidence from a poll that we conducted. So thinking about the first need being operational capital, followed closely by relationships, need access to infrastructure. Communication was an interesting one, and I'll get to that a little bit. But we were almost validated by this in terms of seeing how the public sector and the private sector can work together to actually facilitate some of the solutions that we're seeing. So I'll just continue to share some of the results of what we learned. So across these two workshops, we started to bring together some of the themes and the needs that we learned. And I hope that this is maybe not new to you all, but if you're seeing these needs for the first time, it's really interesting to compare regionally. Definitely in context, some of these needs will become more potent, and in other contexts, maybe other needs are more urgent. But these were sort of some of the needs that we saw across regions and across contexts, and they fall into certain categories. One, I think Alex, you mentioned, was about communication and really breaking down some of the communication silos. Like you said, we may be speaking the same language, or maybe not in many cases, but even if we are speaking the same language, how can we translate our needs and what, let's say, someone down the supply chain, a buyer or a company might need? We are not actually understanding one another. So that was a really big theme that came out of these workshops. where there's a need for a facilitator in the room. So that's where the role of the public sector or NGOs could really take root there, because as we get folks in the room, we need to make sure that we're understanding each other in order to facilitate those pathways. Another big theme was relationship building between and among buyers and sellers. A lot of the times the supply chain is so opaque, so many middle actors, aggregators, processors, manufacturers, kind of sever that potential relationship. Another set of themes, I suppose, would be the market mechanisms. So thinking about how do we influence demand on the consumer side. There was a lot of talk about farmers receiving premiums for doing this good work on the ground. I'm going to continue. I'm going to skip some of these slides. And as I mentioned, this is the first time that we're sort of presenting this work. But we plan to share it more widely in the future. So please stay tuned. I'm going to end by just sharing some recommendations that came out of our gatherings. And I would love to hear your feedback as well after we get into the question and answer period at the end, to hear, do these recommendations resonate with you? Are there ways that you would build upon them? So the first one was really to understand and amplify farmer needs. And I would say farmer in this sense refers to farmers, ranchers, farm workers, so farming communities. And that way, that creates better pathways to access capital. Again, relationship building is a huge component here. And this also echoes what you were saying, Alex, around meeting farmers within their cultural context. And then that serves as a appropriate way to share knowledge and information. So that is going to require a lot of capacity building among, not just for farmers and ranchers, but also for the marketplace actors and the buyers. So I like to emphasize that that capacity building needs to go both ways. It's not just about making sure farmers speak your language, maybe it's vice versa. I'm going to share a recommendation too. This kind of talks about the capacity building and speaks a little bit into the philanthropic sector. So again, relationships was really big within this one. And another really important recommendation that came out of this was thinking about the requirements for grant making. I know, Dr. Odom, you talk about this a lot in your work. We need to think about grant making and making funding accessible. And another idea that came out of this was creating a peer network to share information. Third recommendation that came out of this work was really thinking about changing the paradigm, shifting power dynamics so that producers, if they're able, can be involved in the design of programs and not just be a recipient of the funds. So thinking more about community agency and ownership of regenerative programs is a big theme for us. And that starts too with the investment that's pouring in. One stat that I like to bring up is of the 50 multinational corporations that are committed to incorporating regenerative agriculture into their supply chains, only 8% of those actually have stated plans to invest in farmers. So that's step one, I think, in this case. And then we can start to see more transition to collaboration, community ownership, and as it says here, flip the power dynamic. So the folks who are growing our food and feeding us and clothing us should be able to set the priorities. And starting small, I think, is a good way to end this conversation or start the next bit of the conversation. I wanted to turn now to Dr. Staley again to talk about what's next and some examples for how maybe NACD has seen this work in action what programs are you seeing that are giving you hope? And then beyond just the climate smart commodities programs, how can we take these learnings and really see them blossom?
Thank you. Yes. You know, the learnings from this was definitely very helpful to NDCD and our conservation districts. You know, when we think about, you know, kind of bridging the gap or breaking down barriers or building capacity, and I'll just speak at NACD and kind of like what we're doing. So we recognize that many producers, you know, especially from underserved communities, you know, face barriers to accessing conservation programs and markets, right? We know that some of these barriers, and I'll just talk kind of like about conservation programs, includes like complex technical languages, limited understanding of available resources. And so we're trying to best help producers and kind of trying to navigate those barriers. I think one of the biggest one of all is listening and understanding producer needs. I think one of the biggest barriers to serving producers is effectively is a lack of understanding of their day-to-day challenges. You know, building capacity means they not only are informing producers what engaging them by engaging them in dialogue, but they actually understand their concerns and values and the barriers they face. So when we're thinking about like market access, we're thinking about, of course, having the communication, building those relationships. We know those relationships are critical because they build trust. And I'm sure you all have heard this before, right? But another thing that we're doing, and I'll kind of just share just a couple of stories with, well, one story with you. Our recent success story was Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation District in Minnesota, where the district played a pivotal role in coordinating a public-private partnership to address nitrate contamination in groundwater. The Soil and Water Conservation District staff worked closely with farmers, local government, and private consultants to develop a nutrient management plan that both improved water quality and boosted crop yields for producers. You know, this effort effectively is an example of effectively bridging the gap between public and private sector goals and farmer needs, demonstrating how conservation districts can kind of facilitate cooperation across various sectors. And there's countless other examples of how we do this, but it definitely starts with that initial conversation, understanding what those needs are, and trying to, I would say, develop programs around what those needs are. I'm thinking about, when I think about market access, I'm thinking about other examples, like I think it was some county in Alabama where they're working with producers who want to get into markets, but they might be smaller producers, right? But collectively, they can actually fulfill some of the requirements the need requirements for various stores. So what they did was they formed a cooperative, and they actually had a processing, like a building where all the farmers in the area who was in this cooperative could come together, and they could pool all of their what they grew, all of their vegetables, fruits, however, it could be watermelon, you know, greens, and they pulled all that together. And so, but they were able to get their training and education that they need to understand what the requirements are, or to know how to meet the requirements for those markets, or for that store, right, or company, because sometimes alone they cannot meet the requirements, but together, working together in a group, but also getting that education and support, they're able to meet the requirements for that market. So there are a lot of various examples like that are happening all around the country. So I'm really excited about that. But definitely, again, we have to start with the communication and thinking what those needs are, and then making sure that we're providing whatever support that those producers need to be able to participate in these markets.
Thank you, Dr. Staley. Yeah, and I love what you shared about the cooperative networks. That was definitely something that came out of our workshops together. I'm excited to hear from you all on your feedback around this, so feel free to use the chat, and we'll also be available at the Q&A. And I wanted to just share a slide with our information. I can put this in the chat as well, but I think for now I'm going to pass it back to, is it Suzanne or Dr. Rosales?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And what a wonderful presentation. So much incredible information that you collected in this workshop and shared. And I'm going to pass it now to Phoebe Gooding, Very excited to hear from you, Phoebe. And just a small housekeeping note, I'm so sorry, everybody, about the chat confusion, but thank you all for posting now a little bit about yourselves in the audience, and we look forward to having a more interactive discussion in a little bit. Thank you. Phoebe, take it away.
Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Phoebe Gooding. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a farmer. I have an urban organic farm that I steward with my husband. We're on Occoneechee land in Durham, North Carolina. And I'm also the program director for SAFSF. That acronym stands for Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders. We are a nonprofit and the largest national network for philanthropic grant makers and mission-based investors supporting just and sustainable food and agriculture systems. Our 100+ member organizations include foundations, impact investors, community development finance institutions or CDFIs, funding collaboratives, and regranting organizations. SAFSF moves funders across the capital spectrum to invest in more resilient and just food and agriculture systems. So just to be clear, we're not funders ourselves. We're a nonprofit organization, but our network of members are all funders. I'm new to this role. I've been here for about a month now, and I'm still learning a lot, but and we also have a new ED this year who's succeeding the founding executive director. And so we have a lot of exciting changes happening at the organization. And speaking of new, I just wanted to highlight one of our newest members is the Freedmen Heirs Foundation. And we're really excited to be here with them and with you all today to talk about barriers minority farmers face in accessing climate smart and regenerative ag programs. And I also want to highlight some solutions as well. And yeah, so I'm going to speak from some of my own experiences as well as some of the work we're doing at SAFSF. So currently I'm part of a soil health cohort through American Farmland Trust. Our cohort is learning about soil health, and then we're going to take that information back to teach farmers in our networks. So we're being tasked to encourage farmers to transition to regenerative ag practices like no or reduced tilling and cover cropping. And one of the reasons the cohort has come about is that the US has lost 8 inches of topsoil in the last 300 years, and we're seeing detrimental consequences. So this program is a great program. It's great because it's enlisting farmers and others who are already in community with farmers to teach them and show them that their yields can be greater if they make these changes. And another wonderful thing about the program is that it will pay historically underserved farmers to make the transitions. However, some of the drawbacks is this program is only for commodity farmers. And I think that's what I've seen a lot. And so in this particular program, you have to be growing corn, wheat, soy, or cotton to get paid to be part of the program. And others can join, but they wouldn't get paid. And so, I see that so many of these transitioning programs are geared for commodity farmers. And I also see them very much geared towards large scale farms, farms with a lot of acreage. And so urban farmers like myself, other small farmers, we don't, really see ourselves being able to benefit from these programs. And especially if we read them and the language is like the payment is per acre. So if you're working with an acre, that can feel like it might not even be worth the paperwork and the reporting to go through the process. And the other thing I see, in the transitioning programs is that, I guess the other thing I see is that most of these programs are geared for folks to transition, which is very important. But, I just want to lift up that many of our Black, Indigenous, and Latino farmers have been practicing these traditional and ancient methods of farming that are inherently climate conscious and regenerative. and I like to call it the OG organic. So, I think, it's not about these farmers transitioning to climate smart ag practices, but how can we support the practices that they're already doing? And how can we build their resiliency, in the face of climate change, what we're all experiencing, going 1 week from catastrophic droughts to the next week of catastrophic floods. So I will say, one program I have seen, I think that is starting to do this is the NRCS Conservation Services Program. Our farm did, we're in that program now this year, and we're benefiting from that. And instead of this, the payment and the application as per acre, it's per practice. And so, they're able to support practices that farmers are already doing, and they're also able to support that long term over the next 5 years. And that's really important to be able to have, programs that are going for the long term. But yeah, so even with all of these programs, that seems like, there's a lot of things out there available. There's still the main issue of accessing these programs, and many farmers just do not know that they even exist. And there is a large gap in governmental outreach to minority farmers, and because of the discriminatory history of USDA and its agencies, there has been a breach of trust. And minority farmers are skeptical, and we don't seek out interactions with the USDA agents or the programs. And so this is where the role of community-led networks comes in and is really vital. This is one of the main reasons that I created the North Carolina Women of Color Farmers Network. And it was honestly through my own discriminatory experiences with USDA when starting our farm in 2020 that I felt the importance of being in a space that I could candidly talk with other people who could understand, people who can empathize, and people I could trust. And, farming is a white and male dominated industry. And most often people do not visualize me when they think of a farmer. And so what happens is that people go to what they know. So if there's a program out there for farmers to benefit from, folks will reach out to the farmers that they know. They'll reach out to the farmers who fit their description of what a farmer is. And so my role in organizing the network has been to make sure that, some of the most marginalized and disenfranchised group of people are getting access to resources and opportunities. And it has been incredibly profound to take my farmers to conferences, meetings and trainings, and help change who people see as a farmer. I was able to start the network through grant funding while I was working at my previous employer, Toxic Free NC, and the grant funding paid for travel needs, food, childcare, other costs so that we could gather together, so we could exchange knowledge, support each other, and even collaborate on projects. And I just can't stress enough the importance of supporting community-based networks like these, because we've really filled the gaps that government leaves. We can take calls at 8 p.m. when farmers are finally done for the day and can stop and make a phone call. And we also have that trust capital. I think somebody else mentioned that earlier. We have that we've built with our community, and they know they can rely on us to give them the best possible information. So in addition to providing resources and opportunities to the farmers in my network, I also train them to be advocates, because we know that policy reforms can have sweeping impacts, and we are the ones best suited to educate our decision makers about our needs. And of course, we need funding to be able to do all of this work as well. So I just want to talk a little bit about what SAFSF is doing in terms of policy and advocacy. We're cultivating spaces for our funders to learn how to fund advocacy efforts. In 2023, SAFSF organized a Hill Day for funders to educate congressional members about our Farm Bill principles and also to share the work of their grantees. Over 100 funders attended and met with 31 congressional offices, as well as the House and Senate Ag committees. And this was a great opportunity for funders to speak to Congress and build relationships with their representatives. One of our members is quoted to say that our Hill Day meetings were a great opportunity to build relationships and explore how philanthropy can collaborate with federal policymakers to advance our common federal policy principles. We are inviting them into the field to see how SAFSF network members are investing in communities in their state and districts, as well as to connect policymakers directly to the grantees who are carrying out that work on the ground. So also currently, SAFSF is collaborating with Boulder Advocacy on a webinar series to equip funders with the skills and technical knowledge to invest in and support policy advocacy, such as general operating support and long-term funding. And the goal is that more SAFSF members will support policy advocacy work in organizations led by and supporting underserved farmers. So we're also discussing how SAFSF can convene and mobilize our members to come together and build a network of funders that can fill in the gaps of USDA funding and be more accessible for minority farmers. So for example, funders can provide bridge support in programs like EQIP, and they can bring more support to community organizations that have trusted relationships with farmers, like like our Women of Color Farmers Network. And so they can help with providing technical assistance while applying for these USDA programs, and they can help after the USDA award has been given and help with implementation, reporting, and any follow-up. And just also really want to highlight the importance of collaboration and partnership. And we know that collaboration and strong partnerships can really move work forward faster and with greater impact. And a lot of our work at SAFSF has been about peer-to-peer learning. We're uplifting and we're showing innovative funding strategies to our full network in hopes that more funders support or create similar funding pathways. We do this through our in-person events, like our annual forum. We do this through vital programming, through our newsletters, through our member listserv. And one example of this is that we have uplifted the Soil Health Opportunities Fund. And this fund is a collaboration of the Regenerative Agriculture Foundation and the Rural Climate Partnership, whose efforts are to make the Regional Conservation Partnership Program more accessible by connecting historically underserved farmers to technical assistance and tailored support. And finally, I just want to shout out that we also produced a film called Digging In and encourage everyone to see it. The film focuses on land access, climate change, and farming consolidation, and it calls to attention the issues faced by underserved farmers. And it also offers us the opportunity to bring awareness of the intersections of the issues of our member network and beyond. And just to say, film projects like these, they take us behind the scenes to see the real lives of farmers and the realities they face firsthand. But it also can really inspire us and get our creative wheels turning. And then we can start to imagine what changes we want to see and motivate us to really put that into action. So I think I, covered a lot of different topics here, and happy to take any questions, and I'll turn it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Phoebe. Also a really incredible presentation. You described a number of different resources that I'm sure many in the audience are excited about and would find very useful. I'm curious if your organization currently has any funding opportunities open right now that producers could apply for.
So I guess that's a good question. I don't know so SAFSF does not have funding opportunities. If members in our network have those funding opportunities, I would have to look into that and find out. And because I'm like a month into this role, I don't have the answer to that question right now, but I'm sure that we can find the answer to that. And I feel like I want to say that I'm sure that there's those openings happening, but I'd have to look and find out for sure.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure now to turn it over to Patrick Brown. Patrick, are you? Yes, great. Able to come on screen. Okay, thank you so much, Phoebe. And Patrick, we'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Suzanne. My name is Patrick Brown. I am the Director of Farm Inclusion Program for Nature for Justice. Nature for Justice is a 501c3 nonprofit. Our organization has funded a project in North Carolina to help farmers transition or add conservation practices to their farm or transition to regenerative agriculture. We are going into the second year of our project. The first year, we were able to provide over 500,000 in incentives upfront to minority producers in North Carolina that were committed to adding conservation practices to their farm. Those conservation practices are anywhere between cover crop incorporation to hedgerows, tree barriers, riparian barriers, forestry buffers, or seeding multiple species of grasses in pasture land, existing pasture land, farms that are coming out of CRP or any other type of conservation projects. They're able to enroll new conservation projects that foster to regenerative agriculture and foster climate change. We had over 75 producers enrolled in our project in year one throughout 100 counties throughout the state. This year, we're going in, at the end of this year, this fall, actually, we're going to start our second year enrollment. Our second year enrollment contract deadlines are November 15th. Throughout these contract deadlines, before the contract deadlines, we sign up our farmers that are interested by doing on-site assessments of their farms, seeing how they can be committed to conservation strategies that foster regenerative practices. And we're pretty much fostering technical assistance to provide to those producers that are not familiar with some of the practices that we are able to facilitate. Overall, this project has been very beneficial to minority producers in the state, and we want to continue the momentum going into year two. Outside of the Climate Smart project that we foster to, we also collaborate with other institutions that are able to help foster change and commitment to minority producers. We also are looking to expand our project into Virginia in 2025 by partnering with other corporate funders like Cargill that are willing to help provide equity and inclusion to minority producers, which is very important. As we expand our projects into other states, our company continues to grow. Just this year, we hired over 3 new employees, and we added 4 contract companies to help with technical assistance. Primarily in our farm inclusion project, we try to allow the farmers to do additional work that would incentivize them for their efforts. We hire them as second party contractors to help with our projects as well, which we look to add more value to the producers in the state outside of just farming on their land, but also able to provide technical assistance to other farms. So Nature for Justice is really laying the foundation for regenerative transition in North Carolina. We continue to engage with also universities, specifically land grant institutions, by collaborating on conferences. We host 2 conferences each year. collaborating with those land grant institutions to help foster commitments to regenerative agriculture through those land grants institutions. We also provide incentives to the producers that engage in conference calls or roundtables as we learn about other projects throughout the state, and we invite other organizations to talk about what they are able to offer to producers as well. We share our cohort of networks, allowing outreach to be provided to those producers so they'll know what type of programs they're eligible for, whether they're through nonprofit organizations or their local farm service agency, USDA, or soil and water. So throughout our enrollment process of this fall, we look to add an additional 150 new producers to our project. Our project is good through 2027. So we look to continue to grow our network of producers. We continue to increase the landscape of acres throughout North Carolina in a transition to regenerative. We look to focus on climate control issues. We look to foster to producers that want to be good stewards of the land. We focus on soil improvements, where we also measure not just for NPK usage, but we also measure for carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas emissions. And hopefully by year 2027, we will also have been able to identify markets that producers can add value to their farms by selling some of the carbon credits that the research and development of these grants are able to provide. So we are very excited to continue to do the work. Farmers are excited to continue to regenerate their land. And overall, we're trying to make a greater ecosystem for co-inhabitants, produces crops, increase yields, and incentivize them for their hard work. And at this moment, I can take any questions that anybody has or pass it on to the next panelist.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm curious on the information networks theme. If you can talk a little bit about how Nature for Justice connects with different communities or different producers to partner with you, particularly in light of there's so much confusion around like the carbon credit market and soil carbon sequestration payment programs. So I would imagine there's a lot of trust building that needs to happen as well. Can you speak a little bit about how those connections happen?
Yes, so ideally we are hiring producers that already have been doing the work. They're agriculture specialists in the field. We are building relationships through a word of mouth network. We're soliciting the information via newsletters monthly, conferences, and being on panels like this to help share the information and the broad knowledge, and working with organizations that also have the same mission as we do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, while we wait for some additional questions and for me to collate the questions for that from the audience, I wanted to open it up to the panelists to see if you have questions for each other. It's always so enlightening to hear the discussion amongst different experts that can convene in these forums. So I wanted to first see if you have questions for your co-panelist, and then I'll jump into the audience. And Lakeisha's already raised her hand. So Dr. Odom.
So many questions I wanted to ask. Thank you all so much for this panel. It got me really excited. It's really for anyone, but I think the first person that mentioned it was Alex, this need for cultural appropriate and regionally relevant guidance, right? So my first question was for anyone on the panel, because I know the theme kept coming up, but Alex mentioned it first. If you could just talk about like why is that so imperative when we're thinking about how we can encourage our minority farmers to adopt practices, regenerative practices, or just adopt conservation practices.
I can provide you an example. of a project that we're working on now. I'd love to hear this from all the other panelists, but everyone sounds like they're doing some work on cover crops, right? Cover crops is the new silver bullet, I guess. You know, everyone's talking about it. Biden mentioned it in one of his addresses. You know, every large university is now doing research in cover crops. I've been doing work on cover crops for the last 11 years. And there's been like requests from our USDA counterparts on like, why aren't more farmers in your region doing cover crops? And when you talk to the farmers, I mean, they're pushing cover crops, right? Everyone's pushing, it's like the new product. And you talk to farmers like, well, we're worried about water. You know, we're water limited. We're dry farmers, right? And of course, you know, the response from my colleagues is, hey, man, if you do cover crops, you just do it for, 5 years, you're going to start to see these benefits with water savings, with increased infiltration and so on. So, you know, realizing that there was this gap in listening to some of the concerns of farmers that I work with, we decided to do some collaborative research on cover crops. Has it been done in this area? Not really, but where it has been done are on experimental field stations where conditions are controlled, and they're not done in real working conditions, right? So farmers I work with say, hey, look, setting up a cover crop trial, I won't even hitch start up my tractor and hitch the implement if it's under 20 acres, right? So I want to see a plot like at least 20 to 40 acres big. And I want to see these side-by-side trials, right next to each other. And I want to figure out, well, what does it mean for moisture? So we set up the trial just like that. The farmers hooked up their tractors. We bought all the seeds. We set it all up. We used the species that they wanted. And sure enough, lo and behold, the farmers were right? And you know, it's funny too, because when they drive the tractors over the different quote unquote treatments, they're like, oh man, this side of the field was much drier than that side of the field. Well, how do you know? It's like, oh, the way that the tractor, the way that the implement bounces, and you could just tell. If you ride and track, you could just tell. We've been doing this work for about 7 years, and I'm convinced that cover crops steal moisture. I'm convinced in certain conditions. So what we followed up with, we collected, there's 140 studies out there globally that did similar kind of projects. We assembled all the information. We conducted what is called a meta-analysis, where we reviewed everyone else's data in the context of the same methodology. And we found that there are specific regions where cover crops do well. Where are they? Well, Pennsylvania, they do great. You know, thank you, Rodale Institute, for creating this movement, right? Because a lot of the work around cover crops started in these areas where we considered humid agriculture. This is where areas where evapotranspiration is exceeded by precipitation. You have more rainfall than plants actually need, right? When you regions like ours, where evapotranspiration exceeds precipitation, that's what we call arid areas. So any cover crop farmer, any farmer doing cover crops in arid areas are going to experience moisture loss if you're dry farms. You might have a good year, you know, you might have it rain one year and just right on time, and you look like a genius, right? But for every given year, if you're a dry farmer, and Phoebe, I heard you're cover cropping somewhere, you're going to lose moisture. And what does that mean? That if you don't have water to irrigate your crops, the crops that you plant right after your cover crop is going to experience drier conditions, right? Maybe better soils, maybe more nutritious soils, but if your water is your limiting factor, then that recommendation is not regionally relevant, right? I have NRCS counterparts who are like, oh yeah, but you know what? We've done these trials in Arkansas and it does great. And I say, well, how much rainfall do they get in Arkansas? I get almost triple the rainfall we get here. Okay, so that's not regionally relevant. What else you got? Well, there's nothing. So for an institution like myself, what I want to do is create regionally relevant information in cooperation with farmers. And that's how we get around doing it. Now, the culturally culturally accessible, that means we take the information and we communicate that information in the different modalities that are relevant. I'll give you one example. We have a Spanish language production. We have a spec sheet that it's all in Spanish. I also go on AM radio. I do a Saturday show every once in a while. And every time I'm on AM radio, farmers call me like, I just heard you on the radio. A lot of farmers in our region still get their work, get the word out on AM, right? And so these are what I call kind of culturally appropriate media, right? And so that's another, that's, you know, that's just another example.
What a wonderful example too, both of those, as we talk about information networks, both what information is being shared, how is it developed, and what are those mechanisms to get that information out there. Thank you, Dr. Rosales. Michelle, and I know you had a similar question on the chat as well. And I'm going to turn it over to you to weigh in.
Seneca, I saw your hand up too. You want to go first?
Oh, Michelle, you can go first. Go ahead.
I'll just quickly share and voice over what I responded to Cameron. Thank you for the question in the chat. You asked what we meant by a cultural context that serves knowledge sharing. And I wanted to sort of piggyback on what you were sharing, Phoebe, around respecting the knowledge that farmers have already. They already have the solutions. So really respecting the sovereignty of farmers and the decisions they make on their land. I think that's cultivating a cultural context of that avoids this prescriptive, let me tell you what to do because I know and I'm funded. And so therefore I have all the answers. And I say referring to sort of the white male dominated conservation sphere, that the funded conservation sphere. Meanwhile, there's all of this innovation that's been happening for thousands of years by people who've been stewarding the land and know those regenerative practices, Black, Indigenous, Latino farmers. And I guess one of the other aspects of this that came out of the workshops and just other work that we've done in the Growing Our Future initiative is when folks from different parts of the supply chain are coming together, we can't always expect that to be on the buyer's terms. Maybe it means coming to the farm and just experiencing and having a meal together, or meeting farmers where they're at in terms of language access, and listening first. So maybe a lot of this seems obvious to you all, probably to the panelists at least, but it just bears repeating because we can't always expect farmers to come out. And as you mentioned, you know, getting on a call at 8 p.m. is sometimes the only time to meet. Maybe pick up the phone instead of sending 7 emails, and kind of get out of the typical ways of working that some conservation professionals might be more used to. So that's my take on it. What do you think,
Michelle? Michelle, let me just jump in because it's so funny because like the 6 words that farmers I work with, they hate to hear from professionals like me is, you know what you should do? Like nobody wants to hear that actually. My kids don't want to hear that. So I mean that is a common question, and it's so common that we have this ongoing joke in my program. You know what you should do, and then everyone kind of rolls their eyes. Anyway.
So I know I'm not a panelist, but I just wanted to add some additional context, and thank you, Dr. Rosales and Michelle, for bringing that to light. I think a lot of times in the conversations that we have day to day, that's a part of the conversation that doesn't always get highlighted or folks really bring to the forefront. And I think it's very important because cultural relevance, cultural competence, all of those things bring about a level of building trust. And it also helps with effective communication to whatever group of people that you're working with. Meaning farmers, Black farmers in the South have different needs and different, barriers or difficulties that they're facing that, other minority groups may not face to the same extent. And so I think that it's very important when we're talking about this tailored support, being culturally competent and relevant, even on a regional basis, and understanding, where the farmers are, what they're growing, how they're growing it, what are the traditions behind that, and making sure that there are folks that can communicate that and articulate that at a very competent level. And then also when we're thinking about addressing these systemic barriers, cultural competence helps us to address them at a way and provide funding and resources that is more targeted. And therefore you have less inefficiencies and you have more efficiencies, and therefore we are actually doing the work that can help the farmers. However, when we go into it, or sometimes I'm going to say in the past, because we're working on this right now, but in the past, when cultural competence is not at the forefront of the work that's being done, you skim over a lot of things and you make a lot of generalizations, and then you put that out on everyone, and that doesn't work. And so making sure that, when we're thinking about these tailored approaches, we're factoring in what fostering innovation would look like, and what empowerment and advocacy can look like, effective communication, as well as building trust across these different community groups, and in the ways that are most beneficial to them, meeting them where they are, but also helping them to expand and get to the next level. It's not going to be a one size fits all for all farmers. And so whether that's looking at it on a regional basis, looking at it on, ethnicity, crops grown, production practices, I think that, paying more attention in every component of that, whether it's culturally relevant and competent, is something that, and I say we all have to do a better job at, myself included.
I was just gonna jump in to say, just in terms of what you're talking about with the network connection as well, and the question I think you had earlier for Patrick, Suzanne, with my Women of Color Farmers group, we had one of Patrick's colleagues join and talk about his program to us. And because I know Patrick and I are both in North Carolina, and I know him and I know the work he's doing. And, and then seeing one of his colleagues out at a place where I'm at as well, we're in the same spaces, then I can say, oh, can you come onto our call and share the information with us? And because we try to, keep an affinity space, that's why Patrick wasn't invited into the call himself, with the Women of Color Farmers, but his colleague, Jasmine was. And so that's, another way we get to know each other. We see each other in these spaces. We have that trust for each other. And then we can say, hey, can you join? And I know from that call, some of the attendants, from the group went on to attend the call that Nature for Justice had the next day about the program that they're doing. And then they can learn that program, and hopefully they can, join the program and be able to benefit from it. So just wanted to respond and share that.
Great, thanks, Phoebe. We have a question for Patrick in the Q&A. There's curiosity around what the incentive structure is for participants in the roundtables that Nature for Justice puts together.
What's the structure?
The incentive structure particularly.
Oh, yes. So we incentivize participants for their time, up to $75 an hour. Depending upon which roundtable that is up for discussion. We also provide honorariums for those that are willing to participate in the discussion, that are co-collaborating on topics of discussion that can meet the producers' knowledge that they're looking to learn about, whether it's conservation, climate change, or just topics that farmers want to talk about, financial issues, business development, any of those things that we can share or add value to that producer, we are able to incentivize that time that you spend with us sharing that knowledge.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I have a follow-up question on that, because this gets a bit at just the farmer to farmer, producer to producer opportunities to share information and communicate, which are so time limited. If anybody else has thoughts about that angle, about how to encourage and enable more opportunities for producers to get together and to talk and to share knowledge. Whereas I think a lot of what we've talked about today is sharing information from institutions and organizations to producers.
Yeah, I just want to say, Susan, something that we're coming up with, a key strategy is incentivizing hubs throughout the state that farmers are in charge of. For example, I think we set up like a 4-stage barrier within the state, and we highlight a particular producer that has a lot of community support within their areas, and they co-collaborate meetings and schedule meetings so that information is being vitally shared. And then what we do is incentivize whatever it takes to make that meeting successful. So we call that our co-collaborator hubs, and we appoint specific leaders in that community that are farmers to be able to lead those meetings.
That's awesome. That is such a great model. Alex, it looks like maybe you were going to add something.
Yeah, we've had a lot of success with WhatsApp. Just creating a WhatsApp group, and people can get on and they can get off whenever they want, right? And I'm like I eavesdrop on a couple of the WhatsApp groups. We have one for like young farmers. And they just ask each other questions. Hey, who did you speak to at this office, or have you guys seen this program? Sometimes it's even like, hey, what is this pest that I have, in the picture? And those questions are answered immediately, like, and sometimes they stir some discussion. So I mean, yes, I often get the after 8 p.m. phone calls myself, but sometimes it's easier just to get on WhatsApp so that the community can answer. And so we create some of these WhatsApp groups. Sometimes for the older folks, maybe just the text message groups is better. But I do find that helps with just immediate responses and greater community participation.
And a follow-up question on that, Alex. So you're finding that the WhatsApp groups, those are all farmers in the same area. It's a geographic community.
Yeah, but it's funny because some of them move and then they stay on the WhatsApp group and they're starting a farm in North Carolina and they're like, hey, anybody know what they're paying for this one organic pesticide? And it's just interesting to just see the diversity responses. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Michelle, I see your hand up. I'm just gonna say one quick thing and then we'll go to you. One of the things that I worked on, a project I worked on last year, was looking at this question of how farmers communicate amongst themselves, particularly producers of color. And we found that there at that time was a lot of communication happening on Facebook, that a lot of it was not the answers weren't regional or locally appropriate, and that it was having really counterproductive impacts because from somebody, as you talked about, in a different region for things at work that are not going to be effective where that producer is necessarily. So it's interesting to hear the WhatsApp and the geographic context, but that it can also be helpful to have that diversity of perspectives.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, you're exactly right. I mean, all the WhatsApp groups that I've been involved in that we've tried, they're meant to be local and regional. Like when we have people move away, they just don't leave the WhatsApp group, which is fine. You're welcome. But sometimes it's just like people are like, oh my gosh, have you ever worked with this person? And then, there's not even advice. It's often just kind of commiserating, right? And I think sometimes that commiserating it's on a lot of that commiserating, it is the same story everywhere you go, right? bad experiences at the FSA office is reported everywhere, right? And so, I guess for maybe for agronomic, consultation, it might be more regional, but I have found that, some of the broader groups, it still applies.
Yeah, thanks. Michelle.
Sure. I love all this conversation about sort of ground up organizing, and I'm going to just offer something that's a little bit more top down, but it's a bill that I think I saw someone in the chat from American Farmland Trust here, and I know that it's one of their biggest priorities. It's the Farmer to Farmer Education Act for the upcoming Farm Bill. And really what it does, I'm excited about it because it's talking about farmers having the most competence in their fields and also having that trust relationship with others. And so what this bill would do is help get some of that Inflation Reduction Act funding that was going to go to technical assistance that are maybe outside of the community actually funneled into the community. I don't know how this will work in implementation, but it's just something that's on my radar I wanted to share. That kind of complements different other financial incentives and really unlocks that peer-to-peer learning aspect. So we'll see. We're not sure when the Farm Bill will be passed, but just something when we're thinking about advocacy, if anyone wants to look that up, I can share more.
Thanks, Michelle. Dr. Odom.
This may, Michelle, you can stay unmuted because I think one of the things, as we were talking about the ground up, but more that top down I remember in the workshop that you facilitated, there was a lot of conversation around what could be done from funding organizations to kind of make it a bit more accessible. So I think since we're talking about like reimagining how we're communicating and how we're engaging, also reimagining how we fund. So I don't know if you just had a couple of thoughts from that workshop where you're like, this is really a kind of a recommended practice for us, for those folks that might be in that funding space to consider based on what you heard in that room. It's anecdotal, but that's still really valuable information because I think there was consensus around some of the barriers.
Sure, and feel free to jump in, Lutrina, as well. I think one of the common concerns or experiences that we've heard across the board is that oftentimes applications, be it NRCS, EQIP and CSP funding for on the conservation side, or the more of the philanthropic funding, it's often just such an administrative burden for farmers. And so changing the application requirements, reducing the amount of reporting requirements, may sound obvious again, but is just such a way to make those programs more accessible. And we know that on the USDA side, I mentioned EQIP and CSP. I apologize, I'm using acronyms, and I will define them in the chat, but basically these are the funding programs that help folks adopt conservation practices on their farms through financial and other supports. They are oversubscribed, but they're unequally distributed. So farmers of color don't have the same access as their white counterparts to those programs. And that I think anecdotally, we can say that that is because of, partly at least because of the administrative burden. We can also talk about other discriminatory practices at USDA, and Dr. Rissos, you probably know the most about that. But Dr. Odom, maybe you should stay unmuted too, because I know you've actually changed some of your own practices as part of the FAR portfolio.
Yeah, we are trying to think about different ways that we can ask for information, shorten application processes. We have thought about and we heard some really great ideas around like asking for a verbal annual report, for example, or doing some things of that nature. I think that there's a lot of levers to be pulled to make things more accessible. There isn't one fix all silver bullet, but I think trying to make these modifications where possible can kind of alleviate some of the burden. So we have been thinking about that. But if there are more suggestions or models that folks have seen that work, we would love to hear it in the chat. Please feel free to put that in there.
I'll just say I think that is very helpful, for small producers like myself. It's, I definitely could benefit from just being able to verbally share, and report out. And if that's to like a bridge funder or somebody else who's helping with that, and then can help get that information to USDA for the larger reporting. I think that is very helpful, so I think that's what you're saying, and I just have found that incredibly helpful ourselves for our farm.
I wanted to mention, something that I know some of the things that we're, our soil and water conservation districts are doing is we are, advocating for those producers, and helping them to fill out those applications, right? Actually, going over it with them and making sure that they understand everything. But also, we have to think about there's a lot of capacity that needs to be built on both sides, with soil and water conservation districts, even with USDA, having enough
Dr. Staley, we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure what you heard, but just saying, I'm sorry, my internet connection is unstable, but just saying that, there are challenges on both sides as far as capacity for USDA to process the applications as well, but also those farmers having support in actually completing the applications, actually going through the process, actually walking them to the FSA or NRCS or whatever office to make sure that they're following the paperwork all the way through and making sure that it's completed, thinking about heirs property issues as well. That's a whole nother issue that's in there where, farmers are not able to get farm and tract numbers so they can participate in these programs. So, we have to think about building and kind of advocacy around all of these issues.
Yeah, and that's actually something that the Equity Commission really tried to address, some of those customer service issues. And trust me, like we heard all the stories. I myself, we just got a farm number for the farm that we run as part of the university, and it took us 4 or 5 visits to the FSA office and practically demanding that we walk out of there with one. Right. And imagine, it takes so much capacity and so much energy. I can imagine any farmer for that matter, after the second or third visit, just saying, forget it. I'm done. I don't, it's wasting my time. And so, and I do think that, for example, not just when we go back to kind of this idea of cultural competence, I mean, that term can be used in a lot of different settings. We have a small urban farm, 5 acres surrounded by homes on 3 sides, and the FSA agent could not fathom how that was a farm, and they're like, I don't understand what's happening here. What is this? What is this? And so, of course, their idea of a farm, the culture of that farm and in that person's mind was just like these larger industrial farms. So these are all things that need some attention, and the more advocacy that different groups can afford, really kind of can help guide the USDA into making those changes, right? I mean, a lot of it honestly is providing incentives for your elected officials to help push those changes from inside. And so that's why we also encourage constituencies all over the country is to reach out to their elected officials and saying, hey, these are some issues that I'm having. And here's some, here's some recommendations that align with them in the equity report. Maybe you can help me push these through, because ultimately that's what a lot of them will take, is that kind of advocacy, like kind of grassroots advocacy, to be honest.
Thanks, Alex. I think we have covered all the audience questions, but I want to see if any of you on the panel, Dr. Odom, Seneca, do you have any other questions for each other, or Any questions for yourselves that you're trying to go out and answer right now?
I have a question for Phoebe. Phoebe, well, congratulations on the new post. I'm excited for you because I think you mentioned a few things that really kind of piqued my ear. I have a friend, actually, a very close friend, who became an executive director for not a nonprofit, a grant giving foundation. She recently attended the Executive Directors Association's meetings for a lot of the philanthropic groups. And she told me that of the 200 participants, there were only 10 EDs of color, right? And so going back to kind of this, the idea of representation, worldview, kind of, and she's there and she's like, it's funny because we all sat at the same table, everyone kind of grouped together, and, just trying to get that sense of affinity with a group of folks who, who noticed that discrepancy exists. I'm curious if you've had any insight in the short amount of time you've been there about conversations happening within funders in this space to acknowledge, like to say, hey, look, I mean, even within our organizations, we just don't have that inherent worldview that maybe there's some things that they can do to change that. And I'm just saying this because as somebody who is trying to build capacity in the future generation of workforce, a lot of those skills that we want, I could train an agronomist, but I can't, it's hard to train that cultural piece, right? These are qualities that are very difficult to train. Like bilingualism is very difficult to train. I mean, biculturalism is the same thing. I'm just curious if you've heard of any conversations in that end, right? About how they can move their own needle towards kind of these underinvested farmers.
Yes. And I just want to clarify, I'm not the executive director, so I'm the program director, just to clarify that. And yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. And I really, even when you said that earlier about the biculturalism and I think, yeah, just the importance of being able to come with your lived experiences. I don't think I can speak to this new space that I'm, just coming into, with that answer yet, but I can say that in my past role, the organization I was at, we started to, um, when we were hiring folks, starting to really bring in lived experience as a skill, right? As a skill set. And those things like if you're bilingual, and sort of tallying that up in terms of how we are just making sure that we're aware and taking into account all that people bring in. I think speaking to it from a farmer perspective, at least also, being able to be a farmer in the roles that I've been in, and I think probably Patrick can attest to this as well. I think it's so important for people to hire folks who have lived experience, so being a person of color, being a farmer and coming into these spaces with, I can speak right from the eye, and from my own experiences. And I think that is, it is such an asset. It is really such an asset to any organization. And so I think anybody who's doing any kind of work with communities, if you're doing work with communities, then you should definitely be having somebody from that community doing the work with you, and you're going to go so much further with it too. And I think that's that kind of, grassroots versus top down, but being able to share, being able to, when we talk about speak the language, I mean, in so many ways, right? We can speak that language and we know what folks are, we know what's going on with folks firsthand. So it's just such an asset. It's priceless. And really every organization should make sure that we're stronger, obviously, with diversity. And so bringing folks in, not just, yes, with diversity, but from those impacted communities is going to make your work better and more impactful. I don't know if that answers your question. Does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about like trying to kind of change the culture of those who are in positions of power, right? Like these organizations, they have the money, right? And often like I have this struggle with my own students. Sometimes I feel like the push is to try to train our students, my students who are students, you know, young folks of like, you know, students of color to assimilate into the industry, right? And saying, okay, these are the norms, you have to live up to the norms. Instead of trying to work with those agencies and saying, look, these are what our students, what we want the diversity of workforce to look like. And this is how you move towards that middle, right? And that's a big struggle, right? I've sent a lot of students to the Manners Conference. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, but it's a Minorities in Agriculture and Natural Resource Related Studies club, an association. And often the students come back and going, oh, I feel like even worse about myself because I am so far from what they say that we should be because and then they get more worried about their accent, they get more worried about their outfits, they get worried, you know, instead of saying, hey, look, I mean, agencies, this is not, we shouldn't expect every student to fit the same mold. I mean, yes, you want an agronomist, but having an agronomist who's bilingual has value that more than, you know, having other qualities, you know, or is as valuable as having other qualities. These are the kinds of the changes that I'm asking about, whether these agencies that have the power, whether they're willing to concede more towards the middle, towards getting, you know, inclusion of a diversity of constituents.
Yeah, and I think the short answer is some folks are, just starting to question that, and some folks aren't even there yet. But I think it's great to have these conversations, to bring
Yeah.
that in, and of course about like, the folks who are holding so much power. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's germane to this conversation, right? Because information is power, right? And if we can't, if people who need that information can't have access to it, um, you know, then we're just perpetuating an imbalance, right? And so, I mean, these are changes, this issue around how organizations that have inherent power, how are they changing? Right? And I think that's what we're seeing from the panelists. We see a lot of community-based organizations or organizations that are powered by people who are from those communities, right? I don't know if you've seen Marshall Gann's new book. He published it in January. He's a community organizer, and the new book's called People Power Change, right? And it's something that I'm currently reading. It's a great book, and it's just about like the people on this call, right? You guys are the ones who are powering change in your own institutions, right? Phoebe, you're gonna do a phenomenal job in your new position because you're the one powering that change from the position and from the worldview of a farmer, a minority woman farmer at that. And I think that's something that I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with y'all because it is inspiring. Even people who are on, I saw all the attendees, people who are on there. I'm sure you guys have that same worldview because you're just in part because you're on the call, right? But to hear those voices and to hear how you guys are trying to bring your organizations towards farmers. I mean, I've heard this like, hey, farmers have to meet us halfway. Well, kind of. I mean, if they had the same amount of capital that you did, I get it, but this is not an even playing field. You have to meet them on the farm. You have to meet them in their homes, where they're at, right? And so, I think that's maybe a separate discussion, but maybe germane to this webinar.
No, that's great. And I'll just highlight one of my favorite farmers, Farmer C. Patrick knows her as well, and she likes to say it is not an even planting field. And that is something that people absolutely need to know. Yeah.
Alex, a follow-up question on that, and then I'll see if anybody on the panel has a closing thought they want to share, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Odom to wrap us up. But working on the Equity Commission, that was probably the highest profile, perhaps the most well-resourced effort to date, to bring these broad issues of inequities and injustice within the agriculture sector to the attention in a very detailed, specific, solutions-oriented way, the attention of leadership at USDA, but also the agricultural space in general. And I'm wondering if through that work, did the Equity Commission, did you have outreach from some of the larger foundations or private organizations wondering how they can do more to work with and support minority producers and to value diversity?
Yeah, well, you bring up a couple of really important points, right? I think for those of you guys who've been following the Equity Commission, you heard, at least initially, there was a lot of reservation from the commission members because we've all done something similar in the past. The USDA has assembled commissions a dozen of times. They've had all these different kinds of commissions that try to get some recommendations, many of which have not been fulfilled by the agency, right? So even before we started, there were 740 different recommendations that are highlighted by different commissions, of which maybe a third of them were even addressed, right? And so, there was a sentiment, even from me, was like, is this just another exercise? And I think because the USDA invested so much resources in it, we actually had a budget to pull this off, bring people together, have some support from within the agency and outside. I think that we all come to realize that this was as you mentioned, probably one of the most monumental efforts, the genuine efforts by the government to really understand and then address some of these inequities. Unfortunately, I mean, that investment, which was appropriated, which was awarded by Biden's signing of his one of his first executive orders, that funding, of course, ends. There's a very discrete time period on it, and we'll see what happens with the next election. But I do think that creates a space for maybe non-federal funding to keep the momentum going, and maybe even get some of the current members to continue their participation and their expertise in advocating for some of these changes. I won't speak on behalf of anyone because I think we're all pretty exhausted from our detail. But we're invigorated, right? We are both now informed and compelled to continue the work. So I do think that there is a space for non-federal funding to perpetuate the momentum, right? Because I think if for whatever happens, if we lose momentum, of course, as we all know, it's kind of harder to pick that back up. So this could be a very opportune time for some of those foundations to step in.
That's great. That's great advice. I hope that happens. I hope if there's anything I can do to help make that happen, it definitely the work needs to not lose momentum. Okay, panelists and Seneca, Dr. Odom, any closing thoughts you want to share before we move into the wrap up?
No, I just want to thank the panelists for agreeing to be with us today. I think we had a very engaging conversation. I also want to thank all of the attendees. The chat was very robust, and I like all the ideas and thoughts that were presented in the chat. So thank you all very much. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Odom if she has any closing thoughts.
No, again, so much gratitude for the time that all the attendees gave, all of the communication going on in the chat, and the great conversation happening with our panelists. Just a reminder that we have one final series webinar in this series. It'll be December 6th, the 1st through the 3rd. 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And we're looking at cost benefit analysis and economic discussion. So we started talking a little bit about the economics of this, but this next final panel will really dig into that. And so hopefully some of y'all can join us again. If not, as per usual, we will record and have access to the recording on our landing page. So I think that along with kind of our final, see if I can transition. I'm having trouble transition to my final slide, but just again, thank you so much. And I was trying to share the final piece of information with our contact information, but it'll be included in the follow-up. So every attendee will get a follow-up and our contact information is there as well. Excuse me.
Thank you, Dr. Odom. If any of the panelists have a closing thought that they want to share, it would be wonderful to leave with a bit of a synthesis. And if not, I'm gonna pick somebody.
I would just like to reiterate for Nature for Justice Farmer Inclusion Project Year 2 enrollment ends November 15th. So any minority producers in the state of North Carolina that are looking to be incentivized for the hard work that they do throughout the year, please get in contact with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Patrick. That is wonderful to know. Okay, Phoebe, I'm gonna see if you want to close us out here.
Okay, well, I'll just say thank you so much to everyone. And I think I'll just end with saying that, you know, the work that we are doing is towards liberation. So the work at SAFSF, the work we're doing is to liberate capital. And that's really important to fund the movements. And so I'm just really excited to be here with everyone because it takes all of us to move truly to that place of liberation. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Phoebe, Patrick, Alex, Michelle, Dr. Staley. Thank you so much for your time and your incredible work. And I look forward to staying in touch with all of you, as I know the audience members do as well. I hope everybody gets to enjoy the rest of their day and have a good weekend. And hopefully we'll see you all in December at our next convening. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye,
week,
everyone.
y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. See ya.